The women of One Piece are some of the most well-written female cast in fiction history. Not just for their assets, but the complexity of their characters, their interesting backstories, and their larger-than-life ambitions. When we take a step back, the women in One Piece are probably the most accurate representation of women in real life. Well, not their proportions, but rather the way they are portrayed as the most fearless and resilient people in the whole story. Women in this story are just absolutely built differently. One of the most underrated examples of this that come to mind is Ace's mother. The woman held a pregnancy for 2 whole years just to protect her unborn child. That is the definition of a superwoman. What I also appreciate about how Oda writes to women in this story is the range in their character. We can have women like Queen Otohime, who's a non-violent civil rights activist, but we also can have women like Big Mom, who is a tyrannical villain who will literally eat your soul. But the one thing I think Oda does better than anyone else is how he writes the complexity of what it means to be a woman in a very progressive way. Unlike any other story, One Piece has well-written trans women, queer women, and even women whose genders are yet to be confirmed. This to me is one of Oda's best real-world narrative connections because it forces us to answer the question, what is a woman? Is it someone who can give birth? Is it someone who looks like a traditionally attractive female? Is it someone feminine, reserved, or can they be the complete opposite and still retain the right to call themselves a woman? These themes on the complexity of sex and gender have always been a favorite theme of mine to explore, especially since it ties into the biggest theme of the story.
Tama, こんくらいで喜ぶな。当たり前にしてやるから。俺たちがこの国を出る頃には、お前が腹いっぱい飯食える国にしてやる。
Freedom. What does it mean to be a free woman? Is the label of woman itself a cage? This got me thinking with Oda's love of exploring this theme. I wonder if there is a woman in this story that has defied all the traditional categories we've placed on the word woman. Well, I believe this to be the case, but not with a woman yet to be introduced. Rather, it's one whose legend and infamy we know all too well of, the strongest woman in the world, Rox Xebec. Yep, that's right. I have a theory that Rox was always a woman. I know what you're thinking. You're ready to debunk my theory before even giving it a chance. But the title of the video was so ridiculous, you couldn't help but click the video. But I know you only came to tell me, look, Middleway, Rox couldn't possibly be a woman because in chapter 1041, Big Mom clearly said he when referring to him. Oda wouldn't confuse us on someone's gender, right? Right? Well, about that.
Leave me alone!
To open your mind to the possibility that Rox was always a woman, we must understand we are reading a very interesting story. A story that consistently subverts our expectations and at times purposefully confuses us. One area I feel Oda especially has this habit is the topic of gender. If you take a second to think about it, from the beginning of this grand adventure story, Oda has always found a way to make the topic of gender relevant while at the same time controversial. The very first time we see this highlighted is in Zoro's backstory. Through Kuina, we get the first instance of gender being an important theme. As we all know, Kuina felt that she couldn't be the greatest swordsman because she was a woman. At first, I couldn't put a pin on why Oda decided to write this into the narrative because I always felt like he was one of the more progressive mangaka when it came to positive representation of women in the story. Think about it. We have such great women in this story. There are very few characters in anime that have a better written story than Nico Robin. The scene of Nami stabbing her shoulder and Luffy stopping her is till this day the scene that hooked me on the show. Vivi, Big Mom, Boa Hancock, Bonnie, Rebecca, the list of well-written and powerful women in One Piece goes on and on. So why then, at the very beginning of the story, do we get such a traditional and regressive perspective on the strength of women? Kuina can't be the greatest swordsman because she's a woman? What a load of misogynistic crap, is what I initially thought. But now, I believe I may have figured out why Oda chose chose to write this into the story. See, it's all about subverting expectations once again. I figured out that the theme of Kuina believing she was weak simply because she was a woman was a narrative set up to later introduce that the most powerful pirate of all time was none other than a woman. Weird? Yes. Surprising? Yes. But outside of Oda's usual antics, not at all. First, we need to understand Oda has no qualms about confusing us with someone's gender. He's made it especially clear with the introduction of Yamato and Kiku that just because a character is referred to in a certain pronoun doesn't mean their physical appearance will match that pronoun. And if you really think back, Oda has always played with the idea of gender ambiguity. Starting with the introduction of the first Okama we come across, Bon Clay, this very colorful yet legendary member of the Crocodile's crew was our first introduction to Oda's progressive portrayal of transgender representation. Bon Clay would then soon introduce us to Ivankov, the queen of Okama. Ivankov's ability to transform someone's gender changed the story forever. For the very first time in the story, it was completely logical to assume that anyone could have been a completely different gender than what they started off as. Cough cough, crocodile. Anyways, all these intentional gender bending plot conveniences made me realize this theme of gender identity must have a very important thematic conclusion. Perhaps it's not just a gag or random occurrence of Oda's eccentric personality. Rather, this focus on gender is a clue to a very important plot point yet to be revealed in the story. But why rocks? Why would this theme end up going back to the most powerful pirate being a woman? Well, what most people underrate about One Piece is how important women are in the series. In most other manga, women are often a subsidiary focus to the main plot. But in One Piece, this is not the case at all. Actually, in every major arc, a woman usually is the focal point of the narrative progression. Starting from Syrup Village, we have Kaya, the sick shut-in whose butler was out to steal her fortune. The following major arc, we have Nami, the woman who's forced to do Arlong's bidding to save her village. Then we go on to Alabasta with Vivi, a woman trying to prevent the downfall of her kingdom at the hands of a criminal mastermind. Then we go on to Skypiea with Caunus, a woman who is the first to defy the god of her people. Then we go on to Enies Lobby with Nico Robin, a woman chained by her past and forced to leave the crew to save her crew. Trust me guys, this goes on in almost every single major arc. You can skip to if you don't want me to keep listing them. But if you want me to drive the point home, keep listening because the consistency of women being at the focal point of the plot is honestly jaw-dropping. Even in Thriller Bark, most people miss the important narrative behind Victoria Sindri, the woman obsessed with plates. Victoria Sindri was the first zombie to break out of Mariah's control while remembering her past. Her story served as the representation of willpower, even extending beyond death. Her backstory served as the narrative backbone of Thriller Bark. We go on to the next arc with Kami, the woman mermaid who was captured by celestial dragons. Now this is very important because this moment served as the catalyst towards one of the most major plot points in this story. Luffy punching a celestial dragon and kickstarting the Sabati Buster Call and leading to the 2-year time skip. This goes on in an effort to save time. I won't delve into every important woman in time skip, but just to list them, we have Boa, Shirahoshi, Rebecca, Otama, and of course we have Bonnie in the current Egghead arc. A woman is always the center of every new island. The consistency of this theme is so apparent. But why? Well, I believe this consistent theme snowballs into a woman being at the focal point of the whole story. See, there are two events that serve as the mover of the narrative. The most obvious one, of course, is Roger's execution and reveal of the One Piece existence. And the second event we were just introduced to in the story is none other than God Valley. God Valley is where it all began, even Roger's rise to stardom. It's God Valley where Kuma was inspired to save everyone like sun god Nika. It was God Valley that legends like Whitebeard, Shiki, Figureland, Garp, Big Mom, and Kaido solidified their legends. God Valley is the event that ties the whole story together, even more so than Roger's execution, I would argue. So we have every reason to believe, based on the narrative themes of women moving the story, that a strong woman was once again at the center of the plot. The strongest woman of all, Rox D. Xebec, or should I say, Roxy D. Xebec. But I know this is not enough to convince you that Rox was a woman. Of course, this is just a narrative setup, as I've mentioned, but the evidence keeps piling up if we continue to look further into Rox's crew. One of the major reasons why I believe Rox was a woman was due to the construction of her crew. What I found most interesting about her crew is that she has the most women in her crew above any other crew in the series. Not only that, but she has the strongest women in the known verse under her. She's got prime Big Mom, she's got a prime Kuja Queen in Gloriosa, and she has the infamous Stussy. Now at first, like most people, I didn't find this many women on one crew peculiar. But when you really look at how every other crew in the story is constructed, it starts raising some eyebrows. Look at Shank's crew, for example. Absolutely no woman on the crew, at least no woman of prominent roles. With Whitebeard, it was the same exact way, a crew full of sausages. With Kaido, it's almost the same thing, with exception to Black Maria, the Toby Roppo. We have to at least give Kaido credit for having Yamato, but even if he identifies as a man, can we count him? With that being said, actually, I believe Yamato gives us another huge clue as to why Xebec was born a biological woman. Yamato is consistently called he, even by his own father, Kaido, who goes as far as calling him son. But has anyone ever wondered why Kaido was so comfortable with this? The same Kaido that was starving and enslaving innocent people. Why is someone of Kaido's moral disposition so open to the idea that Yamato is a man? Could it perhaps be the case that he's experienced a biological woman identifying as a man before? Could it be that his captain was once a woman but later on identified as a man just like Yamato? One thing we do understand about Kaido is that he holds strength in very high regard. The strong decides justice is his motto. So if Rox were the same way and he admired her because she was still strong, then it follows he would be okay with Yamato doing the exact same thing, as long as she or he is strong. At least that is my hypothesis. But moving on from Kaido, let's go back to understanding how rare it is to have so many women on a crew. The only ratio of women on a crew that we've seen in this story that can match up with the Rock Pirates is perhaps the Big Mom Pirates. Big Mom is the only Yonko who not only has a good number of women on the crew, but also women in a high position of authority. Charlotte Smoothie is the only woman Yonko commander in this series, and she's lovely and strong. Really wished we saw more of her, because her power is so weirdly cool. But anyways, isn't it interesting that the only woman Yonko commander is from a crew where the captain is a woman? Well, I'd wager this is the exact reason why Big Mom was a high-ranking official in the Rock's Pirates, because Roxy herself sought out a strong woman to join her crew. It's also vital to note that Big Mom would never follow a traditional male as a captain, so it never made sense to me why Rox would be the only exception. This idea is even more relevant with Gloriosa, who was a Kuja pirate. But why would a queen of the island of women go to be under the command of a man? Does that not sound completely opposite of what the women of Amazon Lilies stand for? Would it not make more sense that Gloriosa was inspired by another powerful woman to join her crew? Even if you subscribe to the idea that Gloriosa fell in love with Rox, there's no rule that says she couldn't have fallen in love with a biological woman. In fact, I'm sure that happens all the time in Amazon Lily. There's no way a woman of such prominence would readily join the crew of a simple man, but they would join the crew of a superwoman. With all this being said though, I know this theory is almost impossible to prove with the evidence we have in the story for now. As much as I believe there are multiple narrative signs for Rox being a woman, I won't be able to point you to a panel that gives this theory an added layer of credibility. Well, except for Rox's suspiciously small stature when compared to everyone in her crew. If I were to reach here, I'd say that she looks much smaller than the average man, but that won't be the hill of evidence that I die on. But speaking of panels, I know a lot of you may point out that Rox looks like a male in his silhouettes, but may I remind you guys to never ever trust Oda's silhouettes. If we did trust them, all the warlords would have been swordsmen. And Kaido? Don't even get me started on Kaido. Anyways, like I said, this isn't a theory that will be proven or disproven by any panels, because Oda is very unpredictable. That's why in terms of evidence, I am leaning more on what the idea of Rox being a woman means for the story. So let's explore why Oda would make this interesting choice. Let's go back to the very beginning of the video where I mentioned Kuina. See, it all goes back to her. Kuina Kuina was a young woman who abandoned her dreams of being the world's strongest swordsman simply because she felt that as a biological woman, she wouldn't be strong enough. While I would love to disagree with Oda's writing here, Kuina is right. Biologically, most women do not have the physical strength that most grown men would have. Even the strongest women like Big Mom and Pudding are cheat codes in this regard because Big Mom was born a biological superhuman. She broke the rules because of some form of genetic mutation or experiment that allowed her to be much stronger and bigger than the average male. Even Yamato cheated to some degree because she was the offspring of the world's strongest creature. And for my OT fans out there, she cheated the system too because we know she's not entirely human. Throughout the series, Oda continues to have loopholes for strong women because of the gifts of their genetics. So if Rox was a woman, how was she able to contend with the likes of strong men like Garp and Roger? Well, let's go back to Yamato for a second, because I believe her father may have given us the answer back in chapter 1047. In that chapter, Kaido told us something that may be the ultimate equalizer. Kaido famously says, Haki transcends all. See, it all goes back to Haki. If someone has strong enough Haki, physical strength is not so much of a factor. In fact, biology is no longer a factor either. You could be as strong as Oars or as durable as Kaido. If someone has stronger Haki, it won't matter at the end of the day. A shining example of this is none other than the strongest woman of the modern era, Boa Hancock. Although it sometimes feels like Boa is a devil fruit merchant, let's not get it twisted. She is incredibly strong, most likely due to her Haki mastery. I always knew she was strong, but the defining moment for me was seeing what she did against Douglas Bullet in Stampede. Look at that speed. Look at her almost kick a hole through him without even using her devil fruit. That woman is a beast. She almost caught a body against Kobe before Blackbeard sneaked her too. I ain't forget about that. Anyways, even with all this monstrous strength, she's still a normal human woman. She is that strong because she has mastery over all three forms of Haki. She is likely more skilled than even the strongest people in the world because we know Amazonians specialize in Haki. In fact, the woman of Amazon, Lily, is the first time we get introduced to Haki projectiles in the story. So no doubt they are the best. And they have to be the best because they have to make up that difference in their biology. This, I believe, was the exact same case with Rox D. Xebec. Most likely she was the greatest Haki user of all time, so it didn't matter at all whether she was a biological woman or not. In fact, I believe this is the major reason why Oda chose to make her a woman, to emphasize that willpower and ambition is the ultimate equalizer. This also puts a great narrative closing to the theme of women being weaker than men that we are introduced to with Kuina. All along, Oda wanted to prove that a woman was the strongest one of them all. But you know what would be an amazing cherry on top for this? If all along Rox, a woman, was considered the world's strongest swordsman in her era. I mean, she did seem to have a sword. This would make Kuina denying herself of being the world's strongest swordsman be oh so poetic. Something I think is consistent with Oda's narrative sense of humor. That's the theory, guys. Hope you enjoyed watching and listening like always. It's Women's History Month, so make sure to celebrate your moms, sisters, and wives this month and make them feel appreciated. I wanted to make a theory like this to celebrate the amazing women cast of One Piece, and I hope more women get into the story in the future so they can learn from Roxy that women could be as badass as anyone. Middle Ways Girlfriend out.